So should we start?
Yeah, this is Roy with the Studio for Teaching and Learning. I'm talking with Mike Blum and Diana Theisinger of the Studio for Teaching and Learning Innovation. And we're talking about what a good group discussion is. From your consultations and your experience with faculty, what has worked? What has worked in group discussions?
Diana, why don't you kind of give it a start? I know that this is something that you've been working on recently.
Yeah, so I think one common thread is just to have some expectations and norms around what the instructor hopes to accomplish with the discussion, and how they want the conversation to go. So, some discussions might just be a free-form exploration of ideas, and we say kind of anything goes, be respectful, and let's see what you thought about this. But other times are more targeted, and it helps to have some boundaries for the participants so that they know things like share the air. If you're a person who tends to feel very comfortable speaking out in a group setting, this might be a time to monitor yourself, hold back, and let others have a chance to speak. And if you're a person who tends to not like to speak in a group and tends to hold back, that this might be a time to push yourself to share a new idea and keep the conversation moving.
Diana, do you have a set group number that you like to suggest to faculty members that make for a good group discussion, group size?
No, I don't think that there's a specific number. I think, group discussion can work in different size groups. The exception would be if it's an online conversation. I think that, once you have more than probably 10 people in an online group, 30% at least are going to check out. They're going to lurk in the background. So if you want a really active and involved conversation where you're hearing from lots of different perspectives, then smaller is better in those settings. But there are ways to structure larger group conversations to be more productive. What about you? What are your thoughts?
So I think that I make a distinction between group discussion that is in person and group discussion that is virtual, right? So if it's an in-person group discussion, I really like to keep it to between 3 and 5 students, if we can do that in the group. And what I really like to do is I like to let them know up front that there are going to be deliverables at the end of things. So we have a question, and that's a central question that they're answering. And then for them to know that, and sometimes I'll say something like, so, do we have a volunteer to be a scribe to jot down some ideas so that you can report back out? So from my perspective, having that responsibility to the rest of the class really does encourage better group discussion, and that's in person, and that's the first thing that I like to do. The second thing I like to do is to make sure that I use whatever it is that they have done, right? So if we're doing a group discussion and they're supposed to come up with ideas, I like to take the work product from those ideas and actually use them for the next part of the presentation, because then that shows that what they've done has value, direct value to the class. And other than that, those are my 2 big things that I like to do and that I've learned from really great instructors.
What would you both say to such a small number of students in a group discussion, like 2 or 3, when some of the students were talking about, hey, we've got 40 or 30 in this room. How do you, when you have a large class, what are ways to do that group discussion and it not get it out of hand or just kind of die?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's the other thing that I should have mentioned earlier. The other thing that I really like to do in a situation like that is I like to have the students do a little bit of writing at the very beginning, so that they'll spend some time jotting down a main idea. This is what I want to discuss. This is the point I want to get across during this group discussion, and have them jot that down. It can be a very simple idea, or it can be a question. This is something that I'd like to ask the rest of the group. Right, so something that they can be responsible for, because if you just let it be a melee, and open it up to group discussion without that focus, it can really very quickly turn bad.
So writing down before.
Have about a minute of writing so that they spend some time contemplating what they're going to say and take ownership of that thing before then they get into a group.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's such a good strategy too for your students who aren't as comfortable speaking out in group discussions, that knowing that they're regularly going to have a minute to collect their thoughts and kind of prepare what they want to say is going to open up participation a lot more.
And so are you both saying, like, when you're going to have a group discussion, you highlight, hey, we're going to have a group discussion ahead of time? How far ahead of time do you do that? Like, as an instructor, do you say, okay, in this class, we're going to be doing a group discussion, or do you highlight it in the syllabus ahead of time?
Depends if you want it to be successful.
And so if you want it to be successful, what would you do?
Then I have it planned out in advance, because that way you as the instructor have your instructional focus planned and the alignment, like Mike was saying, of how am I going to use, how do I want this to go? What do I want the students to get out of this learning activity? And then how am I going to use this to advance their learning to the next stage?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me it's really dependent on the opportunity at hand. I always like to have a group discussion kind of in my back pocket. So I've always got an easy way to do a group discussion if I want people to chew on a question, right? So I like it to be spontaneous, but that means being a little bit flexible, but just knowing the order that I'm going to do things in, like the order of operations. Like this is the part where I'm going to liven up the class with a group discussion. I want you to think about X. And since I'm always asking hypothetical questions anyway, it's very easy for me to then say, this is an okay question for a group discussion right now. And I'll pose that and I'll say, group discussion time. I want you to write your thoughts. Very easy. I want you to write your thoughts. I want you to get together with 3 people. I want you to talk for 3 minutes on what it is, and I want you to share out what your responses are. So yes, if you're going to do something that is more tied into other activities that you're going to do in the class and other scaffolded activities, I think it is important to schedule those during the semester. But it's also a really nice tactic to bring the students closer together, to get them thinking, and to get them to incorporate what it is that they're learning directly into their knowledge stream.
What happens when an instructor gets basically dead air? Just you start the discussion, maybe a question, maybe a reading, and there's no response.
I come into classes where they've never seen me before, and I'm asking them to engage, and I'm asking them to interact. And yes, there is dead air, and there are things that you can do, and there are techniques that I've learned, because I deal with more classes than most professors teach in a semester, and I deal with them not over the course of the semester, but I see a bunch of them, and I take them as they come. They are, I don't know, I've been handed them from the professors, so I don't know what their mood is going to be. I don't know what the mood of the room is going to be. So I'll always start getting them kind of livened up. You can't have a discussion unless you've already warmed up the room, right? And so I warm up the room, I tell them something about myself, I get them to open up. And if I see them start to engage and they start to loosen their bodies, if their body language shows me they're ready for a group discussion, then I'll do it. If I'm seeing that they're tight, and they're tight-lipped, and they're crossing their arms, and they're looking away from me, I'll wait until I've got them, and I'll get them with easy questions. I'll get them with easy questions where I'll ratchet it down, and I'll say, so who here, and I'll make it personal. I'll say, who here is watching whatever the latest show is? And then I'll get people talking about that. And once I've connected it to what they're interested in, I'll find a way to get to the subject. But getting them in the right frame of mind for me is it. And I'll stop and I'll go back and I'll say, okay, this isn't working, let's try it this way. And I'll be honest with them. I'll say, this is for all of us. right?
Okay.
Yeah, and you touched on this, but I think this idea of like if you've thrown out this big abstract question and you just get crickets back, breaking that down into like, okay, well, let me take just like one piece of this or get a starting point and, like Mike was saying, make a personal connection, because people love to talk about themselves. And so then once that gets going, you can build on that energy.
What about the difference between introverts and extroverts? Are there ways to bring out introverts in a conversation that are effective? I know you mentioned the writing, and now the simpler questions, but anything else that for introverts?
You got to make everyone feel comfortable, no matter what, and you have to be approachable. If you're not approachable, the introverts are going to close up. If once you're approachable, the introverts want to approach, and that just takes practice. That just takes intentionality and presence, being in the moment, and saying, I'm going to focus on being approachable and putting myself out there and making myself vulnerable, so that the student, the introvert, fills that void. That's how I do it, but that's, yeah.
Yeah, and depending on your relationships with the students, you can always have, a plant in the audience. You can email a student in advance and say, we're gonna have this group discussion tomorrow. I haven't heard a lot from you, so would you be comfortable sharing about this particular targeted thing? I'm going to, call on you if that's okay. Kind of set it up, but it does depend a little bit on the size of the class and the relationships.
And you get a great perspective here of the way that I do things by the seat of my pants, and how Diana does things by actually planning. And they serve
planning seems to be a very important.
Right.
The most important.
It is.
For some of us.
It is. No, it absolutely is. And because I have a vision in my mind of what's going to happen. So I've done the visualization beforehand. So I've told that story to myself, and I know how it's going to go. But no, that's another that's crucial. I think your advice there for getting at the introverts is really, really powerful, to give everyone an opportunity to present something to the instructor.
One of the students was saying she felt manipulated when an instructor has a very strong point of view but does not communicate that strong point of view until the end of a group discussion. That's a hard topic to get to, I think. But
wow.
How would you encourage an instructor to share their perspective within a group discussion? That's the question.
That's so interesting. Well, that's a problem, though. I've noticed that's an issue, not just in group discussion, but across the curriculum, is if an instructor has a particular point of view, a particular perspective that they are hiding or that they are not showing. I think it's the duty of the instructor to either state what their perspective is at the beginning. This should be syllabus level stuff, or keep it to yourself. And I think that those are the two options. So I feel bad for the student that is in this situation, but I think it behooves the instructor to, unless you're doing it for a pedagogical reason, if it's not really your perspective and you're doing a little trick at the end there, because I've done that before, right? I've done that trick, but then if it doesn't land correctly, it can feel like manipulating.
Yeah, and my question when you were kind of laying out that scenario is, well, what is the instructional purpose of sharing my personal opinion about this? And if it is, moving the activity forward, or, I'm thinking about one professor I'm working with who is planning a course on the political divide. So in that case, you might need to present some strong opinions and present ways to disagree respectfully using evidence, but otherwise, yeah, you have to either disclose or withhold.
Well, then it gets so tricky, though, because let's say that and it depends on what you're doing, because if I disclose my opinion before I open discussion, that is a chilling effect on the discussion. If I withhold and I let them say whatever it is that they want to say, I would only then say what my opinion was if they asked.
Couldn't there be a third way here, though, where you say, like, I'll disclose that I do have a strong opinion about this. I have a strong personal belief, but I don't want to stifle the discussion, so
Hard.
no?
That's hard for
Okay.
me. I mean, I couldn't do it. And I think that depends on, and that again is the personality of
Yeah.
the instructor, because that's a very individual thing. So for me, I don't think, well, for me, it's not possible for me to hide my opinions to begin with. So whenever I used to teach, my English classes, I made my opinion very clear, for good or ill, but I let them know that I would not hold it against them what their opinion was, because I made sure to engage them in that way. But I taught a while ago. I didn't teach in this climate.
Mm.
Right, the last time I taught a class was, it's got to be like 2004.
Way back.
Yeah, way back. And it's a different political climate. It's a different cultural climate. It's hyper sensitized. And so I don't know that, and I don't even know how valid is my opinion to begin with. So you got to feel pretty confident to ask students for their input and then say, well, then this is my opinion.
A negative discussion about Blackboard was high with the students. They all disliked Blackboard. How would you use Blackboard for a group discussion, knowing this, knowing that this is a problem between all the students that discussed?
And you're talking specifically about the discussion board feature
Yes,
in
the
Blackboard?
discussion board and Blackboard in general. There was not a positive review, but in particular, Blackboard discussion groups. Yes.
Actually, we got a good bit of advice from Candace Benji Small.
So Candace shared a strategy, the 3CQ. I don't have it in front of me now, but I think that the bigger takeaway is to have, again, like some structure and norms for the discussion board. I think that when I hear complaints about Blackboard discussion boards, the common pitfalls are that it's being used as like a participation grade or a busy work kind of assignment. And when students don't see the instructional value, when they don't see that what they're typing there is producing more than just a grade, then there is a tendency to feel resentful about that. If an instructor is really thoughtful about the way that they are structuring discussion boards and students can see, oh, what I typed there is now informing what we're doing in class the next time and is moving the conversation about this topic along and advancing my understanding, then that makes it a more valuable learning activity. And Candace's strategy was around structuring like the way that you respond to someone else's post on Blackboard. So as a student, I go in, I read somebody else's post. I think it's compliment,
Comment, connect,
and question. Yeah.
Really interesting. So now they've got a formula for, and I thought this was so smart. They've got a formula now for going in, and they understand they have to look at it and see what's the best thing. So they have to compliment that best thing that's in that post. Then they have to comment on it. What do I agree with? What don't I agree with? And you can prime the pump, and you can say, these are the kinds of things I want you to look at. And then the connect thing was interesting. Like, what can I connect your thing to, a story or something else in the class? Because that shows that you're really paying attention. And then that fourth one is a question, like where do I want to go from here? The other really important thing, and so that was Candace's input and contribution. I thought that was great. But then the speaker was Claire McKinney, and Claire McKinney gave some really important tips for the student who was doing the writing, and or for a successful group discussion. And the one that she gave that is the onus is on the instructor is stay engaged.
Yeah.
So important for the instructor to go in and comment And Claire also says keep the group discussions small. The group discussions in Blackboard. That's another one of Claire's tips, is keep the Blackboard group discussion no more than 6 students, because then they get to know each other over the course of the semester, and they get to know each other's opinions, and they're much more likely to get good feedback from a smaller group than from a larger group. So that was one of the ones that I really liked from Claire. And so she had one more tip, and what was it, to give examples, maybe it was to.
She did. So she did talk about having examples or models, and she also was very clear in the syllabus. In Blackboard itself, the instructions for students were very clear. Like, I want 250 to 300 words about this. That kind of level of specificity about the. But I love the small groups in Blackboard too, because it can be overwhelming if you've got even 20 people in the group and you go in, you've missed a couple hours of commenting, and it's just a flood of information. So the smaller group keeps it manageable.
And it makes it so that you connect to that smaller community, which I think is important.
Yeah, keep it small, prepare. These kind of things are really important. So I really appreciate you doing this.
No, it was really great. It was interesting because we're thinking about this right now. As a matter of fact, we're going to be sending something out to the faculty members specifically on group discussion.